Ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ticklish Business, the podcast all about honoring and celebrating old Hollywood. As always, I am Kristen Lopez, joined by our own Emily Brontë-esque figure, Emily Edwards. Emily, how are you?
The exact opposite of Emily Brontë in almost every single way.
But we had our listener poll this month. You might have seen it if you were on Patreon. The choices for this week's episode were the Grey Gardens, Modern Times, and Wuthering Heights. And sorry, Charlie Chaplin, but he lost, and so did Grey Gardens. So the winner was 1939's Wuthering Heights, which makes sense because the new one's coming out. And before people say anything, we did talk about this movie a little bit when we did the episode when my book came out on literary adaptations, but we did not do a full-scale episode. And even if we did, I don't care because I knew exactly who I wanted for our guest for this episode, and I would have redone it anyway. But we are joined by the fantabulous director of a movie that is a great companion piece to this film. If you love 1939's Wuthering Heights, or you see Emerald Fennell's new version on the 13th, you should definitely be checking out Frances O'Connor's film, Emily. And we are joined by the awesome Frances O'Connor herself. Frances, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you so much for doing this. My family and friends will tell you I am insufferable about Emily. I love it. I've seen it probably far too many times than is good. I mean, I think when I noticed on social media, because I've seen Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, no spoilers for the moment, I said Emily is a great companion piece to Emerald's film. They're both kind of kissing cousins in a way. But I mean, I'm curious, what is it about Emily Brontë that interested you and made you want to tell her story in your film?
I read Wuthering Heights when I was about 15, and I just found the world in a way felt so familiar and yet so magical and foreign and kind of, I just wanted to go there. And I think, and a lot of that interior world of Emily, I think actually was in her and in the environment that she lived in. But I was doing like my first international film, and I got to go to Haworth where they all grew up. I had a couple of days off filming, so I jumped on the train and went up, and it was kind of incredible. It was like they'd just left, the way they have made the parsonage. I don't know if either of you guys have been, but it's really
on my bucket list.
Got to do it. It's beautiful. And then the landscape around there and beyond is just how she wrote about it. So I was just always very fascinated by her, and then doing a deep dive, particularly on, all the sisters, but particularly on Emily. I just find her fascinating just as a woman, I think, and as an author. I think there's just something quite remarkable about her. And the fact that she wrote that book before Jane Eyre and a lot of the books that came out. And I think in a way she kind of gave the other sisters courage to really write in this very authentic way. But Wuthering Heights is just a great story, I think.
It definitely is. I mean, I tell people, having watched your movie all the time, I'm like, Charlotte would not have written Jane Eyre without Wuthering Heights. So Charlotte was clearly just jumping on a bandwagon, but, whatever. Because I know, the Jane Eyre girlies and the Wuthering Heights girlies, like, we have our beef. It's kind of very East Coast, West Coast, in certain ways. But I mean, I think much like Wuthering Heights, my mom's going to laugh because she's going to be all, don't ask her the question that you always say. I watch Emily all the time, and I always say, I wish the movie ends differently. I know historically it has to end a certain way. And people can Google historically how it ends. Spoiler alert, there's death involved. But I always watch it thinking, like, much like Titanic, is this the day that it finally doesn't end the same way that it ends? I'm curious kind of how you wanted to blend history with the literary conventions. Were there things where you were like, I want to kind of, play with fantasy here and reality here? How did that all come together?
I think I wanted to tell a story about a young woman trying to find herself and trying to be authentic, because when I wrote it, that's kind of, when I look back at my youth, that's kind of what I struggled with, like seeing all the girls being kind of perfect and pretty and not feeling like that inside, and trying to find a way of being happy with who I really was inside. And so I think, and that's probably a struggle for a lot of women, I think, and I think Emily definitely was like that. I think she was quite different. And so, yeah, I wanted to tell a story that was about her kind of coming to self-acceptance, and then to kind of combine in that the story of Wuthering Heights, them running up to the Lintons and looking in, and, like a broken love story, windows flying open with Gothic kind of moments, like the scene with the mask, So, and I just did a lot of research too. They did have this mask that they would play with and pretend there were people with it. So I was kind of inspired by a combination of like their real biography and then my imagination and Emily. And
I love that, because I think it does yield a really good segue into people that maybe haven't read Wuthering Heights, the book, but want to kind of see something within it. And I mean, again, you're also on the cutting edge with this movie, because now Emma Mackey is like, everybody loves Emma Mackey. And I think she's so perfectly cast in this film. Everybody's cast. I mean, it's it's just great. I could sit here and fangirl with you for like the next
so
3 hours. But I mean, I think that's a good segue into kind of dovetailing into the 1939 iteration of Wuthering Heights. Which before I got so excited talking about Emily that I didn't even throw out people. If you like what you are hearing, which you should, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, where you can get episodes 48 hours early, as well as get all sorts of swag. I'm going to be doing my classic film Old Hollywood tour of Toluca Lake in April for TCM Fest. So you will hear about that first over there. That's at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Enough of that. Let's talk about Wuthering Heights. So we're doing the 1939 iteration, directed by William Wyler, starring Merle Oberon and Larry Olivier. This is the story. If you haven't read Wuthering Heights, I'll give you just the rough cliff notes. This is the story of disparate lovers torn apart by class and social convention and pettiness. Kathy and Heathcliff, played by Oberon and Olivier respectively, are foisted back together when Catherine marries Edgar Linton, played by David Niven. Tragedy, Gothic romance ensues, all of that. So I've seen this movie, because again, I'm an Emily Brontë girly. I've seen this movie several times. I've seen numerous iterations of Wuthering Heights. I'm very judgy about all of them. And this one is very much a 1939 take on Wuthering Heights. It's moody. It pretty much sparked a MGM love of adapting literature, which they would continue with, like Rebecca, and eventually Jane Eyre with Orson Welles. It's definitely got some flaws, which is funny. We're talking about Pride and Prejudice with Anne Foster later in the month, because where that film eschewed the Regency era costuming, this movie essentially moves everything to the Georgian period because the costumes looked better. Big ball gowns and stuff. But I still have a soft spot in my heart, even though this is only, I think, the first 13-ish chapters of the book. No person does the second half of Wuthering Heights.
Yeah, that's really true.
But it's definitely one that I think is a good starter, Wuthering Heights, if you're looking for it. Francis, what was your background with the 39 film? What do you think of it?
I mean, I remember watching it. I mean, I watched it last night because I knew I was doing a podcast, so I thought I must just have another look. And it was so much better than I remembered it being, actually. And like, I thought Laurence Olivier's acting in it was kind of gorgeous. Like, he was very present. And he did have moments where he veered into like something pretty big, but he was very authentic, and you really felt like he had this deep love of Kathy. And it looked beautiful, and all the supporting players were really great too, I thought. David Niven looked a little bit out of place, I thought, but I just associate him with, like, being on a ship or something.
I think the biggest criticism that critics had at the time with Niven's and Niven hated making this movie. He did not want to make it. He asked them to replace him numerous times. But the biggest critique I've seen is that he's not blonde, because the Lintons in the book are blonde. And I was like, okay, I mean, I guess that's a critique. I don't know if it's the worst thing, though.
But I read when I was doing my little deep dive, didn't Merle Oberon and Laurence Olivier not get on during the filming?
Everybody hated each other making this movie, yes. But Larry always tended to have issues because he always wanted to put Vivian Lee in movie, and I think at the time he
Yeah.
was dating Vivian Lee, and he had kind of suggested her to the production, and they were like, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So I think he did Pride and Prejudice the year after that, which he said he hated making that movie as well because he didn't feel that Mr. Darcy was interesting. I just think Larry kind of had to stick up his ass about a lot of things. So yeah,
Yeah. I think
he was
he
not a
didn't
fan.
value film. Maybe he didn't value film as much as the theater.
I mean, he was Hamlet. I think he really was kind of like the thespian, you know, he
Yeah.
really liked kind of high art. And yeah, but
Well,
no,
he's really good on
he's
film.
really good.
I mean,
Yeah.
I love pretty much everything that he's ever done. I think he's a great film actor, but probably not much fun to hang out with if you're acting opposite him.
Emily, I know when I told you we were doing Wuthering Heights, you were like, because you, having done the podcast that you've done on literature, you know, you get a, yeah, Emily's
Tell me
podcast,
more.
Fuckboys of Lit, is great. You should definitely check it
Okay,
out.
oh.
Yeah, but I know you have opinions about the Bronte landscape. What did you think? And you have not read the book. I knew that.
I have not, no.
No. Well, what did you think of the movie?
It's very fascinating. I will say that I'm intelligent enough to know that the book and all its film iterations are incredibly important to literature. I just don't like it. There's I'm allowed to hold those two dualities within me. I don't personally connect with it really at all. I'm sure if I had read the book when I was younger and in a more like formative space, like most people come to Wuthering Heights when they're younger. The romance of it, is incredibly compelling. I just don't particularly care for romantic literature.
This is why I keep telling you got to watch Francis's film, because
That's true.
It's got sauciness, it's got the Gothicness, it's got all
do
of the
love
Bronte
Gothic
things.
literature. So I will give you that. I am a huge fan of the Gothic aspect, and the entire school of Gothic literature. So I appreciate when Wuthering Heights adaptations and people who deal with the Brontes play up the Gothic aspect and the Gothic themes of the Brontes, because they're so important to the school of literature. They're so important to how we all interact with these sorts of separated and closed stories. It's like, even when you know how much I love Rebecca, and it's obviously almost one for one, they're interrelated texts and films completely. This was very interesting. I'd seen the masterpiece like Tom Hardy adaptation that came out in the 2011
2009, I think
2009.
Yeah.
So I had seen that previously, but he's such an interesting actor in that he really threw himself into the physical sort of degradation that happens to Heathcliff, where his manifestation of the grief is so physical for him, that it was really interesting for me to see Laurence Olivier kind of not do that, like that sort of messiness, that sort of letting it affect the physicality of him. Is so he cleans up good, but the other aspect of Heathcliff, which is like the physical debasement and things like that, doesn't really happen for Laurence Olivier, because I just don't think he was that kind of an actor. Whereas obviously, Tom Hardy loves doing that kind of stuff. I thought what I was really shocked by when I watched this was how great the kid actors were, because the children playing Kathy and Heathcliff were phenomenal. I would say they were on par with Merle Oberon and Laurence Olivier. They were incredible.
Yeah, I agree. It was just so refreshing, I thought, and that William Wilder got those performances from those kids, because they were just, and then they looked so similar too, especially the Merle Oberon young version.
Yeah, they were fascinatingly similar, especially because Merle Oberon at the time was still hiding her parentage. So, specifically.
I think that's really interesting, right? That she was kind of hiding the fact that she was she half?
She was Asian.
Yeah,
half
she's
Asian.
born in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. And just the theme of Heathcliff being dark and not acceptable. I mean, that must have been quite something for her to have while she was making the film, I think. And then also Laurence Olivier being difficult.
Yeah, it was interesting to rewatch this, because we're having that discussion now with the Emerald Fennel take, which is Heathcliff is written as dark, and people interpret that as a person of color. And there's a lot of debate on social media that is not nuanced at all about that. And to go back to 1939 and realize that there actually was, an East Asian woman playing this part, who was of course hiding it, but was still playing it, I think is really ironic to how the book is still kind of being interpreted and how creatives and actors are still choosing to take all of that, which is interesting. But Sarita Wooten and Rex Downing, by the way, were the child actors, and they're really good.
Yeah, and they never really quite worked after this. This was sort of the ending. They had a couple of bit parts afterwards, but they weren't adult actors. They did not really particularly work after being kid actors. I think what's so fascinating to me is, especially with the modern discussion about the new movie that's coming out, is the Brontes didn't shy away from race. They knew very specifically what they were writing. Obviously we have Bertha, the woman in the attic, and Jane Eyre, and they were very specific about saying, this character is othered because of their complexion for whatever it is. They're, obviously Charlotte's very specific about Bertha being Creole, and that language is used. So it always shocks me a little bit when the dialogue around Heathcliff is that, oh no, he was just, like swarthy but still white, where it's like they would not have said he was dark and othered to the specificity that he is in the text if they were not playing very specifically with race.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, the house where we shot, we found this great house in this valley. Emily knew this house, actually. So it was this kind of crazy thing. She knew this house. And the rumor was that they had black slaves there that died. So I think she was kind of inspired by that story. And the weird thing was that we ended up shooting in that house. We only found it out like just before we were shooting. But that's quite a ways from Haworth. But what was interesting, when I was doing my research, there was a guy there that knew a lot about, the different ethnicities that had been in Haworth over the centuries. And he said it was completely white, really, until like 1950 or 60
I can believe
a
that.
white population. So it was quite unusual to see somebody of dark skin there, even though like if you went to Manchester, there would have been a lot of people because, for the slave industry there. But that's obviously, like where she would have got her inspiration for the character.
It's funny, I was in doing the research that I was doing, I was reading this article, and I'll drop it in the show notes, Melvin Watson, about the book. He was talking about, many feel compelled to compare Emily to Charlotte and Wuthering Heights to Jane Eyre, with the foregone conclusion that Charlotte and Jane Eyre are superior. And he quotes from contemporary reviews after Wuthering Heights was published, that calls the work of immature genius, unnatural passion, and dominant sexuality. And I felt very heartened to read that, because one of the things I was talking about with the new version is, about the sexual component to it. And I had a lot of men tell me that Wuthering Heights has no sex in it and it's not a sexy book. And I was just like, I would like to tell you, as a woman and who has read the book, just finished it again recently, and I know a lot of other women, I'm like, there is clearly a sensuality and a sexuality to the relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine. And clearly it was being discovered when the book came out, which I think is hilarious. But I think it's to watch this movie, though, if anything, I do think this is a rather sexless version, which, 1939, the pre-code era is done, but the romance element, we know there are countless romantic movies, and I feel like what's weird, and I'm not really sure where to put my finger on it. Is it Olivier? Is it Oberon? Is it the script by Ben Heck and Charles MacArthur, where the dynamic between them is very codependent, but it still feels very asexual. I don't know. I don't really I get the swooning and the yearning of it, but I don't get the actual romance part.
Yeah. I think it was very dangerous for women to act, actresses to act that kind of baser sexuality, I think. So it was kind of, they would connect it more to like madness or something. Like she's got
Yeah.
to be mad because she's feeling sexy, you know.
As one does, apparently. So,
But no, I just think, and the fact that Mel Oberon was also kind of pretending she was white, I think there was a
yeah.
disconnect there. I think
Yeah.
he was much more sexual, really, and much more passionate in his performance. But I think it was just dangerous territory for her.
Yeah. One, there's a great article by Pamela Mills, that again I'll put in the show notes that
Oh,
says screenwriters Ben Heck and Charles MacArthur chose to concentrate on the mysterious oneness of the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff and their inability to survive in a socially proper world. And I think that is the thing that I notice about the 39 version more so than you watch the 94 version with Ray Fiennes, you watch the '09 version with Tom Hardy. Because those movies come later, they are able to express the sensuality and the desire that I think is in Bronte's text. Here, this is really a movie about class and the concept of Heathcliff being poor and Catherine wanting to elevate herself, which I
mm,
think I'm going to nerd out and turn into that literary nerd. I'm going to put the hat on for a second. But when Merle Oberon gives the I am Heathcliff speech, it does remove kind of a key component of that speech, which is that she marries Linton because the hope is that she can wants to elevate Heathcliff with her husband's money, like she can protect him. Whereas in this iteration of the film, Kathy is really kind of just vain. She wants to rise herself out of the slums, and I think that really does a disservice to the characters in the book because so much of her motivation is that codependency on keeping them together.
yeah. And I feel like the author of the screenplay was just less interested in like really
Yeah.
investigating like her motivations. And you could feel that for her performance too. Like she would do these big gear shifts where she'd be like, you're nothing to me now. And then in a second, she'd be like, you're everything to me.
She's like, never mind.
Hey, let's do this. Let's go back up to that crag. And I just think it probably wasn't there on the page, maybe, but I think there was a struggle there. And I think then as an audience member, you kind of disconnect a little bit to that character because it doesn't feel real. But but saying that, she has some great moments too.
Oberon is great. She doesn't get her flowers, I think, enough as a performer. I mean, she had been working since the early 50s. If anybody has not seen her iteration of the Children's Hour, these three with Miriam Hopkins and Joel McCrea, that's definitely one to watch. Again, also very neutered for the time period in which it came out. They aren't coded as queer characters like they are in the 60s. It's more like maybe they're in this throuple and both women are sleeping with Joel McCrea, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, is that a problem? Like that sounds like the best movie ever. So, but she does such good work. She has such an expressive face when she makes like her resting bitch face throughout this entire movie, like with the eyes. It's really evocative. They've swathed her in some of the most beautiful Omar Khayyam gowns in this movie with the crowns and all of that. She really does. She does a really great job. I think for me, Francis, you brought up Laurence Olivier's Heathcliff. We've seen many a man play Heathcliff. Heathcliff is a lot like James Bond. Everybody wants to play him. There's always a tone to it. And I think for me, Larry Olivier's performance here is certainly different than his Pride and Prejudice performance, but you can see where he's just playing Pride and Prejudice like he's Heathcliff. He doesn't really know how
Right.
to transition between the more comedic stylings of Jane Austen and the more somber elements of Heathcliff.
Oh, that's
But when he's broody, this movie opens by taking the opening of the book, which a lot of later iterations don't do, with the traveling Lockwood who shows up at the house.
love that. I thought that was
I
great. That's
I
a great
love that.
thing. Yeah.
I love that element. And it's funny that people are freaking out right now about the Fennel version and how it does or does not utilize the book. Because I would say most of the adaptations don't utilize the book 100%. We don't take the back half of the novel, which has a whole second generation of children. We don't, most directors don't utilize that. The 94 version, I think, is the exception. And it
Yeah.
tries. tries.
More of it there, I think.
It tries a little bit. It's a little weird to see Juliette Binoche playing a dual role as her own daughter, and she's Kathy and Kathy Jr. But I think this one does utilize a bit more. That Mills article is a great one to kind of look at because it actually deconstructs the movie and the book to emphasize certain things. So, like in that opening, when Lockwood is asking for a place to stay, in the book, it's the servant Zilla who takes him there and kind of doesn't know the backstory of the room that he's staying in. In the book, in the movie, it's Heathcliff kind of just being like, pick a room. And we don't get that weird Gothic element of Kathy's ghost hand coming through.
Yeah, I would imagine they did.
Yeah.
When I saw it, I was just like, oh, did they get cut out of this version? But I don't think it was ever there. But
it's weird that this movie kind of eschews the ghost story. And that's, I think, something that I always miss in adaptations of Wuthering Heights is that it is a ghost story. Part of it, this movie ends very happily ever after, that in death, Kathy and Heathcliff are reunited.
yeah.
But I think that I like the more ghostly elements of Kathy calling to him throughout the book, and kind of being drawn to being cursed on Earth and trying to get to the other side, but being unable to do that. This is all, I just wish this version was spookier, I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I think connected to the ghost thing is this idea of being haunted by someone. And I think when people talk about the kind of sexual vibe of Wuthering Heights, it's that longing, that not being able to get, and the kind of like, I guess like the sexual arousal that comes from the longing and wanting. I think that's why women love it.
Yeah.
And the dark Gothic nature of it as well. And I think that's what we keep returning to it, and I think that's I'm really excited about seeing Emerald Fennell's version of it, just to see, what she does with it. I think it should be really cool.
It's definitely it's definitely very maximalist. I'll tell people if you're not big on like the bigness of her stuff, it's very big. But one of the things that I know contemporary critics pointed out when this came out in another divergence from kind of how Bronte tells it, is the creation of the sympathetic hero, and a lot of critics at the time noticed that Heathcliff is far more sympathetic in the than he is in later versions. One of the quotes is more sinned against than sinning. And I think they point to the sequence when they're kids where Hindley is asking for the horse and he says, well, if you don't give it to me, then I'm going to tell my dad that you're just waiting for me to die. In the book, that is Heathcliff on the horse, and he's kind of got some airs about him. And I think that, again, it goes back to this concept of this movie really being more about class than anything else, that Heathcliff is the servant, therefore he is automatically poor, and thus less worthy, as opposed to a character that is presented in the book as like, this is going to be one of your siblings. And there's a weird like whole conspiracy that people have that Emily Brontë wrote Heathcliff is like the bastard son of Earnshaw, which I think is cool.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's a whole thing that like, why would he just bring him clearly bringing the boy home saying, oh, I saved this foundling? It's all pretense that, and I think they have like examples that like historically in England at that time, there were a lot of like bastard children running around. I don't know. It's a whole thing.
You are. Yeah.
So it's interesting, but the movie doesn't really play with any of that. I think it simplifies things far more into it's the upstairs downstairs, right? He's the lower class. She wants to be upper class, which was a very effective technique in 1930s cinema as the Depression kind of rages on.
Well, that's interesting because like class is like just such a preoccupation here, I think, in England still, I think, and it's interesting that an American film really would kind of pick up on that so much, like thematically, that is, you're right, it's a really strong element in it, like ascension to the upper class and like how she does have a ticket to that and he doesn't. But to do that, she's got to lose her authentic sense of self and become something that she's not really, which is what trips everything up really in the end, I think, that she's not being true to herself. But it's interesting that Because was it a British writer or was he British
So
or
they're both American. I think Ben Heck and Charles MacArthur, I think, yeah, were American
American?
writers. So,
Yeah.
and
It's interesting that that's how they sit that that's what they focused
and I
on.
think there was certainly a studio note about this because in my research, according to Scott Berg, Goldwyn wanted Heathcliff and Kathy to be more likable because he couldn't, quote, see why an audience would pull for a capricious, irresponsible girl or a hate filled man bent on avenging his miserable childhood. Yeah, Emily's face says it all right there.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things about this adaptation is that making it about class just rings so contemporary because as I think we're seeing in American politics certainly, but of course most, global politics is the idea of like everybody was promised this sort of like social upward mobility. And I feel like certainly our last couple of elections sort of pointed out that this concept of my upward social mobility was stunted and now I need to take everyone down with me is certainly such an important
Yeah.
part of the American like male understanding of what is the greatest wrong that can be done against an American male is that you won't let them be rich. And so you have this, Henley especially when they're adults, there's this whole scene where Henley is drunk and Heathcliff has just purchased the estate from him. And Henley is trying to get everyone to go against Heathcliff, saying he stole everything from me. He stole everything from me. And it's like, Heathcliff bought it from you. It might have been pennies on the dollar for what you thought it was worth, but he bought it fair and square and you didn't have to sign the paperwork. He didn't steal anything from you. And so this whole, I think in the book, it is tied to race and racial identity and inferiority and things along those lines. The politics are there in the book. But I think this movie, by hiring Laurence Olivier to play Heathcliff and not acknowledge the race and also not acknowledge the sexuality, it does become a very male movie in that they are talking about property and they are talking about who gets Kathy. And of course, she is politically property at that point. She belongs to her brother, her husband, or her father, and her father abdicated his responsibility to his property by dying when she was young. And so you have this whole concept of who owns what and whom in this movie. And it really does turn into a war of male egos because Kathy wants to go with the poor man who can't give her the life that she wants, ends up marrying the man who should be blonde, David Niven, who's got that beautiful accent and the carriage of someone who is of higher class. And this turns into something that is in the text of Wuthering Heights, which is the battle of class and the battle of wealth, except this movie just kind of forgets everything else that's happening in the text of Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. It's like Shakespeare. People kind of do what they want with it, depending on what their predilection is, I guess, in terms of what their perspective is.
It's something that I think is fun to watch this with Emily, your movie fresh in people's heads because the way you lay out Emily Bronte's story, it's often the bad decisions of men kind of blaming things on other elements. You have a whole love story that is included that is predicated on like I love me some Oliver Jackson Cohen, but his character decisions in the movie and everything being about God, you're just kind of like, dude, you need to just make up your mind and like own some accountability. But I love that. I love that interpretation of how, your interpretation of Bronte is she's just kind of pulled along by by men ascribing their bad decisions on other things that are bigger than everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was trying to explore too was like about female authenticity and how it's not supported by the culture, and that if you don't back yourself because the culture's not going to back your own sense of like wanting to be authentic. And I don't know. I think people are threatened by a woman just being authentically herself because, yeah.
Well, I think that goes back to Goldwyn making that decision because, to call Catherine as a character a capricious, irresponsible girl, really undermines, I think, the character of Catherine as Bronte conceives her in the book, which is this young woman that wants to. I keep telling people when they ask me about, oh, what is Wuthering Heights about? I'm like, it's essentially hurt people, 1800s edition.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
people that make bad decisions under the guise of like, you screwed me over and now I'm just gonna keep doing it in the hopes that like, oh, it'll turn out differently. Like this concept of vengeance not begetting anything more than more vengeance.
Well, I
Oh,
was
go
just
on, go on.
thinking, you know what's interesting in that is that, they've got that speech about I am Heathcliff.
Mhm.
There's no separation between them in a way. And it's like it's literally like acting out one person's brain, I think,
Yeah.
or just kind of flagellating yourself almost. I think those two aspects kind of going at each other because they don't think there's any separation between the two of them.
Yeah, and I think making Heathcliff this sympathetic hero in 39 who is wronged, the audience automatically wants to be on his side because
Totally.
he has been wronged. But he also is far less horrific on in the screen as played by Larry Olivier as he is on the page. I've finished my yearly reread of Wuthering Heights last night, and I was like, he's like beating women in the second half of this book. He's like boxing this young girl across the ears, and he's hanging dogs and doing all these other things. I'm like, the character is really, really hard to love. And it's always interesting when people feel like there's no nuance. It's like, well, the relationship is toxic. You can't love the book. Why do we call it? I'm like, you don't understand. There is a generation of young girls like me, okay? I'm like, call it daddy issues, call it whatever you want. I'm all, but like, there's a reason the girls love the bad boyfriend in movies, okay? Your Ethan Hawke's in Reality Bites, your Russell Hammonds in Almost Famous. I'm not, I'm just pulling people that I have loved historically.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, these guys are bad. We know this. And yet, it is that ... We believe that there is something, there has to be this kernel of something in there. And I think that's what Bronte is kind of espousing, is that like Catherine believes that her goodness will do something to Heathcliff. Like it'll balance those scales. And, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And it's only through the second generation and Kathy Jr. having to go through these trials that she comes out the other side. And the book ends with this hopeful message, less so that Kathy and Heathcliff are reunited, but more that the next generation maybe will get it right and they will put aside all this petty crap and actually like learn how to be decent people. But I get it. That's not a compelling, sexy love story. So, nobody wants that.
It's interesting in Jane Eyre, like Mr. Rochester's got his ex-wife up in the attic and like people go, what an amazing romance story.
I wrote a book about disability in film, and I was talking about this recently. I was like, but remember, Mr. Rochester at the end of the book, he's only changed and is only able to accept love after being blinded and losing a hand, which we never include the hand losing in movies. It's just the blind stuff. So it's only once he becomes disabled and like has seemingly lost everything, the will to live, and is now just like this grungy disabled guy, only then can he be like, I've changed, and finds love with Jane Eyre, which probably is why me and Charlotte, even though she's been dead for hundreds of years, her and I have beef because I don't like that she had to make him disabled in order for him to be an accepting human being.
I was going to say, it was probably not the best thing that my Brit Lit professor in college was also the woman who did the gender studies program and like all of women's history. So all of my introduction to these sorts of things is like, can you believe that this is, it's like, thanks, Maria, you're the best. I appreciate this perspective.
It was nominated for 7 Oscars, only won 1 for Greg Toland's cinematography, but it was nominated for Best Picture, Larry Olivier, and Geraldine Fitzgerald was nominated for playing Isabella Linton, director, screenwriter, art direction, and music for that very, very awesome Alfred Newman score that they use a lot in this movie.
Yeah, I don't remember the music now, but
yeah,
right? Yeah,
Isabella is such a thankless character, especially in this. It's just, I'm surprised that she got, sort of any recognition because mostly she's just there in different hairstyles, and it's not, I'm surprised to hear that she got recognition for that particular role, is what I have to say.
Yeah, I will tell you, Emily, it's worth it to go see the new one because what they do to Isabella Linton in the new one, it's pretty awesome. Just
Okay.
letting you know that. Alison Oliver's take is really good. I mean, Geraldine always played the best friend. Like, I know she made lead roles, she did other things, but like
She's the Judy Greer of the 1930s
she
and
really
40s.
is. She really is. I always think of her as the best friend in the other movie she made in 1939, or Victory, which she's also very good in that, but she always played like the friend who's just like kind of on the sidelines to like a bolder, brassier woman like a Betty Davis being like, you need to stop doing that and act like a correct woman. So I feel like Geraldine kind of got the short end of the stick here and in other movies. But she does pretty good. I mean, Isabella is, I think that the bigger thing we always talk about is like the characters are too old. I find it funny that people are kind of grousing about Margot Robbie at 35 playing Catherine, and I'm like, yeah, but you know that these characters start at like 12. And then like I think Catherine marries Edgar at like 17. Okay, like it's very very young, and I think Isabella is supposed to be in her teens. And I think that Geraldine playing kind of this pie-eyed like babe in the woods, I think that's where I'm just kind of like, ma'am, you were like 27. Okay, like I'm not buying it. I'm just not. But I think that is the fundamental issue, I think, with Hollywood really wanting to adapt these books. Wuthering Heights kind of starts that trend. We would slowly get, adaptations of Little Women and all of these other things throughout the 40s. Popular, classic literature became a real big thing. Like, what can we adapt? And when you have men writing all of it, you kind of get misinterpretations, I think, of the prose, which is not to say that there aren't. I love Rebecca. I love the Jane Eyre with Orson Welles, but I do feel like you start to lose something as people are trying to kind of fit these very gray books into the binary of black and white.
Yeah, that's true. And I particularly relate to what you were talking about, like how they represent women, I think, it's interesting, like when Katharine Hepburn did Philadelphia Story, which she
Yeah.
produced, all of a sudden, and you do have these amazing women through the whole of Hollywood who are just like, boom, I'm here and I'm just this. And then there's other actresses that become more like a feminine ideal of like what men want them to be.
Your
And
Greer Garsons and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's kind of fascinating, and they're also kind of gorgeous in a way. But and I think Merle Oberon suffered a little bit of that in this, a little bit, and like you say, then trying to stuff the book into Hollywood kind of idea.
Exactly.
I feel like there's also something that we haven't quite touched on. Of one of the reasons why Merle Oberon to me is fairly stiff in this is that she and David Niven had been together and she wanted to marry him and he did not. So he broke up with her before they were in this movie together. And I have a feeling that if you had to act in a romantic way opposite the man you wanted to marry who did not want to marry you and cheated on you all the time, it might have some slight effect on your performance.
I think Merle dodged a bullet though with that one when you find out that like David Niven was hanging out in front of the high schools with Errol Flynn. Okay, so I think she might have.
God.
And he talks about that's not me like throwing something out there. That's in his autobiography. Those are in his memoirs. The moon is a balloon. So you should definitely.
He was reading that in high school, actually, I think. I remember reading that book and just loving it. So I must have skipped over that bit. Before.
So I think Merle dodged a bullet there. But I think too, there was another quote that I was throwing out. We've kind of gone back and forth about what the movie wants to espouse, and there's a really good point that's made by Rob Megum where he talks about how the movie ends with Catherine's death and Heathcliff and her being reunited on the moors, and Nellie Dean, the servant, being the one to tell this ghost story. Essentially, this tragic romance. And he says, quote, "The absoluteness of their love is such that anything is worth sacrificing for it. in the popular imagination, that is what the novel is. And I think that is very true. And I think we're seeing that a lot with Emerald Fennell's take, which isn't even out yet at the time of recording, people being like, well, it's where is the love story? And I've been saying since the trailers for them, Emily knows I've complained about it. When they're advertising it as the greatest love story ever told, I'm like, but it's not, because I don't think the book has a love element to it, but it is really this Gothic tale of yes, love, but obsession, about regret, class, about othering, all of these other things. I think Bronte, and Francis, I'd love to know, in your research, I think Bronte set out to tell kind of a Gothic tragedy more than a love story. It just has a love component. So I think when people say like it's the greatest love story ever told, I'm like, that's what the 39 movie sold you. And I think people are just running with it.
I think so. I mean, that's probably, the people who are responsible for publicizing a movie have to think of how can we sell it. It's coming up Valentine's Day, and that seems like a really great way to get people into the cinema. And I'm sure that's not 100%, whatever the filmmaker's intention. Like when Emily came out, they put pink lettering on it, and the whole trailer was kind of like Emily Bronte's kind of up for it, which is not. They sold it as a Sophia. They sold it as a Sophia Coppola movie. Oh, I would have been pleased with that. But I really felt like, and that's a thing about the Hollywood, or how they, cinema's tough at the moment too. So I think people look for hooks, and I guess sex and romance sells. So, and people do have a strong association with that with the book, I guess. But like you say, it's a much more complex kind of world, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've been trying to talk poor Kristen down off of a cliff about the marketing. My husband does movie trailers. He writes the music for movie trailers. And so I've just been like, oh, you don't understand. The guys who make the marketing campaigns are not involved in the film at all. It's
I will
not
say,
the same people.
Having seen the Emerald Fennell version, very interested to see audiences who bought that marketing actually go see the movie, because I left very pleased at the movie, and I was like, that is not at all what the marketing is selling y'all. So I think what I'm interested in is seeing people that are thinking that it's going to be like Pride and Prejudice or Gone with the Wind or something like that, being like, I'm sorry, what is happening here? Yeah. So it's I keep telling people I think it has a lot more in common with Emily, the movie, than it does with something like, like a Gone with the Wind or something like that. This more old-fashioned type of romance. So yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, I'm curious now.
Yeah. So in case anybody is curious about what won over Wuthering Heights, as we start to wrap it up, you can try to see what the Best Picture nominees were. So does anybody even, it's 1939. Does anybody want to make a guess on what won Best Picture? Because I feel like if I say it, you all are going to be like, well, of course.
I don't feel this is your world. So I wouldn't feel confident enough.
It's our girl Scarlett, isn't it? Scarlett,
it's Gone with the Wind. Yeah, yeah. So Gone with the Wind. If anybody, if you're looking at what else was nominated alongside the aforementioned Dark Victory was nominated for Best Picture, as well as Goodbye Mr. Chips, Love Affair, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Ninotchka, Of Mice and Men, Stagecoach, The Wizard of Oz, and Wuthering Heights. So pretty much every great movie of 1939 was nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, what a bumper year.
Right? They say
that's great movies back then.
That's why, 1939 is considered the greatest year in entertainment. I'm inclined to say they aren't wrong, because I think we've done our fair share of 1939 movies, and they're all really good. Including this one. Overall, I definitely, I enjoyed this one. I think having seen other interpretations, I love the 09 version the most. Well, I take that back. Having seen the Fennell version, time's going to tell. I need to, keep the distance going. But right now, the 09 is still my kind of go-to when I tell people which ones to watch. The book is still just as moody and petty and dark and broody as I remember, and I love it so much. But all of that is to say, this iteration is a really good starter. If you're looking for kind of your entry into Wuthering Heights, this is a good one. Emily, final thoughts?
I think you're right that this is such a much more palatable sort of like entry to a very, very weird text. It's like it keeps the Gothic at arm's length. And so that's probably a much easier way to sort of encroach upon learning more about this, because Gothic literature is bizarre. If you don't know what you're walking into, it can really take you for a ride. So I do think sort of, I don't want to maybe say simplifying it into a class and love story is it's like a Cliff's Notes version, which you expect when you see a lot of things translated to screen. And, it's good. It's just, it's good. I appreciated it. Arts Olivier is great. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, the kid actors are phenomenal. It's just everybody brings a good game and you get the movie that you expect.
Yeah. I want to give Francis the last word on this film. What are your final thoughts on Wuthering Heights 1939?
Well, I just think it's a tribute to Emily Brontë, really, that, like, for me, the ones that have been made so far don't really live up to how I saw it in my imagination. And I think that's what a really great book can do. So even though I see good things in all of the ones that have been created so far, it's just hard when a book really, it's like you've seen a movie in a way. But I appreciated some of the performances in this one, and the world too is kind of great when they're running through the rain and all of that. So I love all that.
I love it. Listeners, you can send us your thoughts old school ticklishbiz@gmail.com, or we are on all social media at ticklishbiz, unless it's Twitter, which we don't have that handle, which is at ticklish_biz. I would love to thank the great Frances O'Connor for sitting down and letting me nerd out about a great movie, as well as this movie. Please go watch Emily. I think it's on Canopy and a bunch of other streamers, if you have not seen it. Francis, where can fans find you online? Anything coming up that they should be keeping an eye out for?
I'm just going to I'm making my next feature I'm doing a film in Rome, which is kind of like a Frank Capra-esque film called Sister Maria Goes to Rome.
Okay, I'm in. You had me at Capra.
Yeah, and I'm with Thomas and Mackenzie, so we're shooting that over the summer, well, end of summer, because it's too hot in Rome in the summer. But yeah, so that's my next thing. But yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so Emily, I know we want to make sure that we have her audio. Well, that's going to close us out. But before we leave, we have a very important announcement, and that is that this is Emily's last show for the foreseeable future. I don't want to say forever, because I hope it's not forever.
No. I'm already penciling myself in for some of the things that you've got on the schedule for the rest of the year. But unfortunately, I do have to take a little bit of a hiatus. I do have a couple books I have to work on at the moment. So unfortunately, my time with Ticklish Business has to be curtailed a little bit. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me for the last 2.5 years. In and out of varying tragedies where I also had to dip, like when my house burned down and things like that.
No,
But fortunately, my time stepping away now is more celebratory than terrifying.
Yes. And of course, I mean, again, I'm hoping you'll be back, which would be great because I will. You definitely set a high bar for other people coming on. And so I will be staying. The podcast is going to keep chugging along. I will not be replacing Emily for the foreseeable future. So it's just going to be me and a guest. Going back, weirdly enough, to the old days of the podcast. If anybody's been around since the beginning of the show, 10 years. This year marks 10 years.
It's so impressive.
I started this podcast with a really bad scripted portion that I would read, and then kind of like a 30-minute convo. We are thankfully not going back to those days, but it will go back to kind of the earlier days where it was just me and a guest talking about movies, and hopefully Emily will pop on here and there as she's able to. And yeah, things are just going to keep moving, but it's going to be sad. It's going to be weird.
I mean, do not be surprised if after I finish writing a couple books, I'm going to be like, hello, can I come back, please? Because I love podcasting. I love doing this show with you. It's been such an incredible experience. I've learned so much about classic film. You've allowed me to nerd out about my own, literary and thematic proclivities. And it's just been so much fun to sort of get my talons deeper into this world and be a part of the awesome community that is Ticklish Business. I know I've, found a lot of people through this show and through your listenership that everybody's just been so wonderful and so open to discussing classic film with me and all the other fun things that we talk about. It's just been an incredible experience.
I love it. Well, the door is always open. You know that. and I'm hoping you'll be back in the co-host chair soon, but we're
call
excited.
me in May. You know
Yeah,
that's like
exactly.
right up my alley. So.
Exactly. So yeah, but either way, I'm excited to see where you are with the books, and we will, of course, be talking about them whenever they are ready to be read by the people. But as always, if you like what you were listening to, please consider following us on social media at Ticklish Biz, unless it's on Twitter where we're at Ticklish_Biz. Please be sure to head over to our YouTube channel where if you're watching these episodes, great, drop us a subscribe. If you aren't, we are at YouTube. Just search Ticklish Business because we don't have enough followers for a proper URL, but we are doing all the episodes on there. You can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review. We would love that on Apple iTunes or Spotify. That helps get more eyeballs on the podcast. And we have our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We have a bunch of bonus interviews coming up that are going to be over there first before they head over to the main feed. I got some fun little bonus things planned for the rest of the year. You get episodes 48 hours early. You get swag. You get all sorts of fun stuff. You can start at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. You can follow me on all social at Kristen K. Lopez, except Instagram, where I'm at Kristen Lopez88. And I write all about movies and entertainment over at thefilmmaven.com. I'll have my Wuthering Heights review up there by the time this is up, so you can read it. And my book, But Have You Read the Book? Volume 2 Romance Edition comes out July 28th. So please consider pre-ordering that. It does not have Wuthering Heights. That's in the first book, which you can get wherever you get books. But it does have all sorts of other things, including the aforementioned Pride and Prejudice and some other. Dragonwyck is in there if you need the Gothic. Yeah, that's a fun one. And of course, my book, Popcorn Disabilities, about disability in film, is out now. Emily Edwards, where are you on the internet and what do you have out there that they should buy?
I am on Blue Sky and Instagram at Ms. Emily Edwards. We have just completely 86 to having a TikTok, given that whole thing that happened a couple of weeks ago. So that's not going to happen anymore. So again, back on Instagram and Blue Sky only, or at my own website, which is at MsEmilyEdwards.com. I do have a newsletter. That would be swell if you could sign up for that. I have an extant mystery series called Viviana Valentine Gets Her Man and the Girl Friday mystery series. There's 3 books in that. It's available wherever books are sold and also probably at your local library because libraries are great. And that is pretty much it. If you want to hear more about my book writing escapades and what's on the horizon, please do follow me on Instagram or Blue Sky because that's where announcements will mostly be made, hopefully over the next couple months.
I'm excited. But the podcast will be back in 2 weeks. We're going to be doing a Diane Keaton tribute and looking at her 1980s film Baby Boom. Till then.